Now it's time for question and answer. I just want to tell all the participants, that the attendees, that they can use the chat box to enter their question for the speakers, and then we can address the question directly live during this time together. So, Takis, are you still there? Frank is here.
Yes, I'm still here.
Perfectly, because at the moment I only have one question from the audience, and of course it's about your former talk, and it's from Adedotun Owolabi. Sorry for the pronunciation, it's not always easy for me. And the question is about what is the turnaround time between the application for approval of a regulated product coming from the company till the end of the process. So it means especially when the approval has to go through the member states, standing committee, and adoption. So the overall process, more or less. What do you think? How can you?
Yeah, I can answer that. That is no problem. Okay. Just to give you an example, or just to give you a bit of a general view, and from the novel foods area that I know, but I think it's very, very similar to other areas. Okay. For a novel food application, for a new authorization, it takes anywhere between 18 to 24 months from the time an application is submitted to the adoption of a regulation authorizing the novel food. That is really the realistic time that it takes now. In the past, in the previous novel food regulation, it took up to 4 years, but now it is really shortened quite a bit. Now, how is this broken down? The regulation really sets out specific deadlines by which certain pieces need to be done. Obviously, the first part, as I explained, once an application is submitted, is the validity assessment by the Commission and EFSA. Although there are no specific timelines prescribed to it, it is clearly stated in the regulation that it needs to be done without delay, and it is done really as fast as feasibly possible. Invariably, it includes requests for information to applicants. Then, once this is validated, the regulation prescribes 9 months from the time that the Commission sends the request to EFSA, the mandate to EFSA, and the time that EFSA delivers the opinion. It's 9 months. This, of course, can and often is extended if EFSA requests additional information during the risk assessment process. Then once EFSA delivers their opinion, the Commission must submit a regulation or an act authorizing the novel food within 7 months after EFSA publishes its opinion. Yeah. So, give and take what is prescribed in the regulation, the 9 months for EFSA, the 7 months for the Commission, the time it takes. Overall, in practice, this results in 18 to 24 months from the time a novel food is applied and it is authorized. Are there, of course, variations to that to bring it lower to that? Yes, there are. There have been situations where authorizations happen faster. And of course, there have been situations where the authorizations took longer simply because there was more need for data, information, and even the conduct of certain studies. Yeah. So that's really to give you a bit of a ballpark figure of how long it takes. It is an integral part of the food safety regulation in Europe that we do not, in Europe, contrary to other geographies, the product may not be placed to the market until it's fully assessed. So that's something that the European public, via their governments, the regulations that are put in place, please remember, all of us, that the EU regulations of food safety have been put together by the co-legislators, the European Parliament, the democratically elected European Parliament, and the Council, which is the democratically elected governments of the member states, which express the views of all of us, which says, no, in Europe, you put the product only after it's been assessed and it is safe. So that is really the answer. I hope I addressed it satisfactorily.
Okay, thank you very much,
By the way,
Takis.
that also includes that includes the discussions with the member states and the vote and everything. Yeah, I'm talking about application to actually publishing the authorizing act on the official journal and authorizing the product. Everything is included in the period that I gave. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, Takis, just to briefly let me summarize another question that I got from the chat, and it's
Mm.
about traditional food. So this is from Gabriele Gagliardi, and he is asking if the procedure for traditional food is shortened than the one for novel food. So
Ah,
how about the
yes,
time
yes, yes.
span? What?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that is obviously not covered in my presentation, but I can explain it very very briefly for those not familiar with the regulation. The novel food regulation contains two elements. One is really what we call the standard novel foods. Again, I'm repeating, a novel food is something that does not have a history of consumption in the European Union before May 15, 1997. Why that date is an administrative date? Because that was when the first novel food regulation was put in place. It has no other significance. Okay, so if somebody can document that a food has been consumed in the union before that date, then it is not a novel food. It's a normal food and is subject to the general food law and possibly other EU regulations that may apply when it comes to food safety, but not the novel food. It doesn't need, in other words, a pre-market authorization. It can be placed on the market. If, however, it is a novel food, then it can be either a novel food that we call a standard novel food. It's a new process, a new food that is produced, a totally new food, a different process. It is produced as a nanomaterial, a new plant species, a new production method. There are about 10 categories in the definition of novel foods. And those go through the process that I just described before, which is really it takes about 18 to 20 months. Now, there is a certain category in the novel food regulation which is called the traditional foods, and those are considered, these are foods basically that do not have a history of consumption in the European Union, but which are consumed as staple foods or have a history of consumption in a third country, so in a country outside the European Union. Foods basically that are consumed in Latin America, in Africa, what have you. There, um, the difference between those foods and the normal foods is in the data that needs to accompany the food to establish its safety. In the case of a novel food, more often than not, what we call a standard novel food, that is, you need what we call safety studies, toxicological studies. In the case of the traditional food, what is needed is a very good documentation of its history of safe consumption in a third country. In other words, providing documented evidence that the food has been consumed in a third country, and the time period for that is 25 years. So the applicant needs to provide information documenting the history of consumption of a traditional food in a country outside the Union for at least 25 years. On that basis, when an application, actually it's called notification, but it doesn't matter, is received, once it is validated by the Commission, again, asking information from the applicants, and it's sent to EFSA, EFSA has 4 months to deliver its opinion. And there is no clock stop mechanism. So it's 4 months and then an opinion is delivered. It's actually not an opinion, it's a technical report. And it's also going to the other member states. So it's not only EFSA evaluating traditional foods, but also it is evaluated by the 27 member states. So you have actually, in principle, 28 different types points of view. Some of them are published, some of them are not. So, for example, some member states either don't have the capacity or they review a traditional food notification but do not produce a report. And all that is done within the system that we have in the Commission, called electronic submission system. And the process takes 4 months. So, in practice, in theory and in practice, a traditional food notification may indeed take much less time for the novel food to be authorized than what you would call for the standard novel food. What is this time? I think you should look somewhere between 12 and 16 months.
Okay, thank you very much, Takis. I think we have just another question for you. I'm trying to group the question in a organic way, let's say in a coherent way. So the next question for you is from Giulia Abate, and she
Mhm.
said she asked when a food, or let me say something that we can presume or we can assume to be a novel food, is constituted with ingredients that are already approved from EFSA, but is produced with a novel technology, or even considering that the technology is not genetic based or nanotech based, this food is still considered a novel food or not?
Yeah, this is a question that I cannot answer on that basis. Basically, the regulation foresees the following. It has a definition of novel foods. It has about 10 different categories, but also it has a provision that says that it's really the food business operator that is responsible for deciding the status, the novel food status of the food. If on the basis of the information they have doubts, they could consult, and they can consult a member state authority, and actually the member state authority where they first intend to place the product in the market, provide the information and ask the member state to pronounce itself on whether this novel food is novel or not. This is how the determination is done. It is impossible unless we have a specific application, uh, in which case the applicant has decided it's a novel food, or what we call an Article 4, because that's the article that I just mentioned, consultation with the member state to decide on the status of the novel food, like the one that the person described. Yes, you can have almost endless permutations of situations using production process, using different ingredients that have been assessed and all that. It's very, very difficult to decide just on a description the same way we have in the question. So the applicant should do that assessment first. If they have the doubt, then they should consult with the member state. And that's really the process by which this is done.
Thank you very much. So probably we have time for another question for Frank, or maybe two if they are really, really short. Let me say the first one is from Evangelia Nathaniel, and is what types of data do we need for novel food assessment, and if these data are the same or is the same data set for all the categories, possible categories of novel data or not.
Yeah.
But I cannot answer for the novel food, but for the feed additives, there what we always need is two type of data sets. One is on the safety, so is the product safe to be used? And for that, yeah, you need characterization of the feed additive. So what are all the components? What are all the chemicals into it? What are all the biological components, if there are toxins in it or not? So that's one part. And the second pillar is the efficacy. Is the feed additive also bringing an added value? Because in Europe, this is a criteria that is important. You cannot just put water on the market as a feed additive. It has to be shown that there is an added value for the animal or the product in the end. There are EFSA guidance really describing in detail which type of studies that need to be performed. But yes, there is also different on the category of the feed additive. You need to provide different studies if you want to have a colorant as a feed additive compared to, for instance, an enzyme that is breaking down yeah, the materials, the fiber into the feed of the animals.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the very last, probably for both of you,
May,
in
may I make
general, yeah,
may I
of
make a very
course.
short comment?
Takis, yes, of course.
I think it was very rightly said. In different types of regulated product situations, potential applicants should visit the EFSA site and look at the guidance that are applicable, because indeed there are differences, and the guidances are very, very, very detailed and very descriptive what the type of information is needed. Indeed, it varies, but the package of data is really set out in the guidances. That's the best answer I can give, because if I were to give now the novel food, it would be too long. Yeah.
Okay, I have a lot of questions, and I feel that we will not be able to go through all of that. There is just one question that probably is worth of discussion, and it's about the role of the member state authorities. So for regulated products in general, so novel food, but also additives, what is the role of member states authority in terms of risk assessment? Do they have to go through a risk assessment before placing the product on the market or not? Or it's just about EFSA and then, of course, the relation with the Commission?
No. The role of the member states is practically zero, just like zero is the role of the Commission in the risk assessment. In other words, like I said, the processes are independent. EFSA is the body in the European Union that does the assessment. The whole idea is that EFSA would do one assessment that covers the food safety requirements for a whole of Europe. The role of member states becomes important in the risk management phase, in the discussion of the proposal by the Commission on the basis of the EFSA risk assessment. So once this is done and the product is authorized, member states are obliged by EU law to accept and place the placement of the market of the food. There is no other activity done except in certain situations where additional or add-on food regulations may apply. There is a regulation, I'm going to give the number, I apologize, it's 609/2013, which is the regulation for foods for special medical purposes. And in that situation, and there's also another regulation for infant formula and formula, that additional requirements are needed, which when placing the product in the member state, the applicants must provide the information that satisfies the provisions of those regulations. But this is an add-on thing in addition to authorizing a food additive or a novel food or a food enzyme. It is the initial entry into the European Union market of a food regulated product is done on the basis of an EFSA assessment and a proposal by the Commission, which is discussed with the member states at the technical level, voted by the member states at the political level, and adopted by the Commission at the end. Yeah?
Thank you very much.
But there are a bit of differences also across the different regulated products based on the legislation behind, because what is explained, that is really what is happening for the novel food area. For instance, in the feed additives, then the member states are provided with the full dossier submitted by the applicant, so they also have access to the confidential parts, and the member state can submit comments to EFSA on the dossier, and then EFSA has the obligation to look into the comments provided by the member states, and then we can take them into account in the risk assessment or not. And then you have even other legislations, other areas where the role of the member states is even more prominent. For instance, in the pesticides, there it are the member states doing the first draft risk assessment, and then it's EFSA doing the revision of the draft risk assessment, and then it's finally the combined output that is brought to the risk managers. So there is a bit of variation, and that's a complexity of EFSA. Every area has its own legislative background, so we need to look into the details always.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. I should have made it clear that this really applies to enzymes, food additives, and novel foods. Indeed, absolutely correct. The legislation has its own requirements. That is clear.
Just a very last question for Frank, because I think it's quite interesting for the audience, especially for young researcher. And the question is about the lack or the gaps in data. So what about when EFSA or the risk assessor don't have enough scientific literature available? So there's not a real evidence to use for the assessment.
Yeah. Well, for the regulated products where we work with an applicant who is submitting a dossier, if there is not sufficient information, then that will be reported in the scientific opinion, and then probably the product will not go to the member states and the Commission for possible authorization. It will go back to the applicant, and then it's up to the applicant to decide if they want to do the investment of additional studies to retry the process and bring the product on the market, or if they think it's not feasible anymore. What are the requirements? In another part of EFSA's work, where we get questions mainly from the European Commission in preparation of new legislation in reply to outbreaks of diseases or food contaminations, then in those opinions, yes, EFSA regularly indicates what are shortcomings in the scientific knowledge, and then it happens that we ourselves, or also, for instance, DG RTD with the Horizon projects, follow up on these activities and initiate new research. So it's a bit dependent on what is the type of work we are doing.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you very much, Takis. I think the question and answer session was extremely interesting for all the participants, as the lectures, definitely. I'm sure that many questions will arrive later, will come later, but yeah, we are running out of time. So I think that now we can have our break. So I really want to thank you personally for your your talk this morning and being available for this summer school. And for all the attendees, we will come back in 15 minutes. We will try to keep the break a little shorter to be sure to stay within the time frame of the summer school. So let's meet at 11:20 for the next session, and have a nice break. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. A good day and good continuation to all. Thank you very much.